The council chamber stretched out like a massive cathedral made of metal and glass, floating in the darkness of space. Representatives from 1,000 different worlds sat in their assigned seats, speaking through translators about trade routes and mineral rights. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the back of the human section, his arms crossed, watching Ambassador Paul Grant try once again to make someone listen. Paul had been doing this job for 12 years now. Jake had watched the man's hair turn from brown to gray during countless sessions, just like this one. Today, Paul was talking about the Vraks again. The Vraks' dominion kept pushing into human territory, taking planets that human colonists had already settled. Every time it happened, the Vraks said it was a mistake. Some computer error. Some old map that showed the wrong borders. Nobody in the council chamber seemed to care very much. Lieutenant Sophie Blake sat next to Jake, her jaw tight with anger. She had stopped believing in this process about 3 years ago. Jake knew she only stayed because Paul needed good people watching his back. The galaxy was a big place, and humanity had learned early that not everyone out here thought the same way about right and wrong. The Krill representative, a creature that looked like a praying mantis the size of a human, made a clicking sound that the translator turned into words. The human delegation raises these concerns frequently. Perhaps they should focus on more productive matters. Paul's face stayed calm, but Jake saw his hands grip the podium a little tighter. Productive matters? Like watching our colonies get taken over? 3 settlements in the last year alone. Thousands of families displaced. The Lumenthy representative, a being made of living crystal that reflected light in strange patterns, didn't even look up from its datapad. Territorial disputes are common in expanding civilizations. The proper forms must be filed through the appropriate committees. Sophie muttered something under her breath that Jake pretended not to hear. She was right, though. They had filed the proper forms, hundreds of them. The committees moved slower than continental drift. The Quellan delegates, amphibious beings in moisture suits, simply stood up and left during Paul's presentation. They did this every time. Jake wondered if it was some kind of insult in their culture or if they just didn't care enough to stay. The session ended like they always did. No votes, no decisions, no justice. Just promises to study the matter further and convene the appropriate subcommittees. Paul gathered his materials with the careful movements of a man who had done this too many times. Jake and Sophie flanked him as they walked back to the human quarters on Unity Station. One of these days, Sophie said quietly, someone needs to tell them what happens when you push people too far. Paul didn't answer. He just looked tired. Jake's communicator buzzed that evening while he was reviewing duty rosters. The message was coded Priority Alpha, which meant drop everything. He opened it and felt the world tilt sideways. New Terra, colony world, in the outer rim, population 4.2 million. Status, total loss. The words didn't make sense at first. Total loss didn't mean what his brain wanted it to mean. Colonies didn't just disappear. There had to be some mistake, some communication error. He opened the detailed report and wished he hadn't. The Vraks fleet had arrived in orbit around New Terra 6 hours ago. They hadn't sent warnings, hadn't made demands, hadn't given anyone time to evacuate. They just started firing. Today 1 created, 2I, planetary bombardment from orbit. The kind of weapons that were supposed to be banned by every treaty humanity had signed when they joined the galactic community. The attack lasted for 40 minutes. When it was done, New Terra wasn't a colony anymore. It was a burned rock, with an atmosphere full of ash and radiation. 4.2 million people gone in less than an hour. Jake's hands shook as he scrolled through the casualty lists. His sister Amy had moved to New Terra 5 years ago. She taught literature at the Colonial University, always sending him messages about her students and the beautiful sunsets over the farming valleys. He found her name in the casualty database. Confirmed, dead. No remains recovered. Sophie appeared in his doorway. Her face was white. You saw? Jake nodded. He couldn't speak yet. My cousin Danny was there, Sophie said. Her voice sounded far away. He was 8 years old. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Jake stood up. Emergency council session. Paul's calling for one right now. The council chamber looked the same as it had that morning. But everything felt different. Paul Grant stood at the human podium. And for the first time in 12 years, Jake saw real anger in the old diplomat's eyes. Dr. Lisa Hayes presented the medical data. There were no survivors. The bombardment had been thorough and deliberate. Engineer Nathan Cross showed the satellite footage. The Vrak ships had taken their time, making sure every city, every town, every farm was hit. When they were done, they jumped away without even checking for survivors. Paul played the footage for the council. Jake watched the representatives from 1,000 worlds see 4.2 million people die in real time. Some looked away. Some watched with expressions Jake couldn't read. The Vrak's High Commander, Zthrak, sat perfectly still, his reptilian face showing nothing. When the footage ended, Paul spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the whole chamber. That was New Terra. Those were my people. Human beings who came to the stars looking for new homes and new hope. They were farmers and teachers and engineers and children. And now, they're ash. I'm here to ask this council for justice. Zthrak rose to speak. New Terra harbored separatist insurgents who threatened regional stability. We acted within our rights to protect Vrak's territory. Show us the evidence, Paul said. Zthrak stared at him. We are not required to share intelligence data with junior member species. The Krill representative clicked thoughtfully. Perhaps a fact-finding committee could be formed. We could issue a preliminary report in, say, 18 standard months? Sophie made a sound like a wounded animal. 18 months. For 4.2 million dead. The Quellan suggested economic sanctions. Jake looked at the numbers they proposed. They would cost the Vraks about as much as a parking ticket. Paul tried again. He talked about everything humanity had contributed to the galactic community. Human engineers had designed the transit gate network that let ships jump between stars. Human mediators had stopped wars before they started. Human doctors had cured plagues that were killing entire species. He didn't ask for special treatment. He just asked for the same laws to apply to everyone. The vote was called. Protection for human colonies. Denied. Sanctions against the Vraks. Denied. Even a simple investigation. Denied. Jake watched Paul's face as the votes came in. Something broke behind the old man's eyes. Not his spirit. Exactly. Just the part that still believed the system worked. They walked out of the chamber in silence. Sophie was crying now. Angry tears that she wiped away with sharp gestures. Nathan Cross looked like he wanted to hit something. Lisa Hayes just stared straight ahead like she was in shock. Jake's communicator buzzed again. A message from Earth. From Fleet Admiral Greg Hamilton. It was short. Recall all human personnel from joint operations. Effective immediately. No exceptions. The old rules are done. Jake looked back at the council chamber one last time. They were already moving on to the next agenda item. Something about tariffs on agricultural products. 4.2 million dead, and they were talking about tariffs. He turned to his team. Pack everything. We're leaving. Where are we going? Sophie asked. Home, Jake said. And then we're going to show them what happens when humanity stops asking nicely. The age of patience was over. What came next, the galaxy wasn't ready for. But they had earned it. Every ignored plea, every dismissed concern, every dead child on New Terra had earned it. The humans had tried tolerance. They had tried diplomacy. They had tried following every rule in the book. Now they were going to write their own book, and the first chapter was going to be written in fire. The human section of Unity Station emptied faster than anyone expected. Jake Morrison watched his people pack up decades of accumulated belongings in less than 48 hours. They moved with purpose, with barely controlled rage, and with something else that made the other species nervous. They moved like people who had made a decision and weren't going to change their minds. Sophie Blake supervised the data deletion. Every file humanity had ever shared with the galactic community was being wiped from the shared databases. 73 years of cooperation, of freely given knowledge, of trying to be good neighbors, gone in a few keystrokes. A Krill administrator tried to stop her. You cannot delete council property. These databases are protected under... Sophie cut him off. These aren't council databases. These are human designs that we shared because we thought we were among friends. Turns out, we were wrong. The knowledge goes with us. Nathan Cross was doing something even more dramatic. He was dismantling the primary power core that kept Unity Station's artificial gravity running. The core was human-designed, human-built, human-maintained. The other species had never bothered learning how it worked. Why would they? The humans were always there to fix it. You're going to leave the station without gravity? A Lumenthy engineer asked, its crystalline body flickering with what might have been concern. Nathan didn't look up from his work. Should have thought about that before you voted to let my niece get vaporized. She was 6 years old. Her name was Emma. Remember that name when you're floating around trying to figure out how to fix this thing. Dr. Lisa Hayes cleaned out the medical wing. She took every piece of human medical research, every treatment protocol, every cure that human doctors had developed. The Quellen had been dying from a plague 15 years ago. Human researchers had worked around the clock to find a cure, asking for nothing in return. They saved millions of Quellen lives. Lisa deleted those files without hesitation. Let them figure it out themselves. Next time, she said quietly. Ambassador Paul Grant stood in the main council chamber one last time. It was empty now, between sessions. Just him and the echo of 1,000 voices that had refused to listen. He activated the station's broadcast system. Every speaker on Unity Station, every communicator in council space, every ship in range would hear what he was about to say. His voice was calm. That's what made it terrifying. No anger, no threats, no emotion at all. Just cold facts delivered by a man who was done pretending. This is Ambassador Paul Grant of the human delegation. I speak now not to negotiate, but to inform. For 73 years, humanity has participated in this galactic community in good faith. We followed your rules. We respected your customs. We brought our knowledge, our labor, and our hope for a better future among the stars. He paused, looking at the empty seats where representatives would normally sit. 4 days ago, the Vrax Dominion destroyed New Terra. 4.2 million human beings died. We brought evidence to this council. We asked for justice. We asked for protection under the laws that are supposed to govern all member species equally. We asked for the basic right to exist without being murdered from orbit. Ah, God. Ah? Another pause. Jake Morrison, listening from the human docking bay, had never heard Paul sound like this. This council denied even the courtesy of an investigation. You chose committees over justice. You chose procedure over 4.2 million lives. You chose to protect the killers instead of the victims. Very well. You've made your choice. Now we'll make ours. The broadcast continued, and Jake could hear other species starting to gather around speakers, listening to what the patient humans had to say when their patience finally ran out. Effective immediately, humanity is withdrawing from all council operations. Every human ship, every human station, every human delegation is returning home. We will no longer maintain your infrastructure. We will no longer share our technology. We will no longer transport your goods, or mediate your disputes, or heal your sick. You wanted to see what the galaxy looks like without human cooperation? You're about to find out. Sophie stood next to Jake now, watching the broadcast on her datapad. Other species were starting to panic. The Quellen Trade Administrator was shouting something about shipping contracts. The Lumenthy were trying to access the human technical databases, and finding them empty. Paul's voice continued, still calm, still cold. To every species that stood silent while our people burned, understand this. We tried your way. We tried patience and diplomacy and faith in your systems. We believed that reason and evidence would matter. We were wrong. What happens next is not our choice. It's the consequence of yours. You taught us that, in your galaxy, the only voice that matters is backed by force. Thank you for the lesson. We'll remember it. The broadcast ended. The last human ship disconnected from Unity Station 2 hours later. Jake stood on the bridge of the transport ship Horizon, watching the station recede in the view screen. Without the human-maintained power core, sections of the station were already going dark. Any regrets? Sophie asked him. Jake thought about his sister Amy. About her last message, talking about the spring flowers blooming in New Terra's capital city. About how she'd never send another message. Not even one, he said. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Jake spent the time reading reports from other human colonies. Ships were being recalled from every corner of known space. Diplomats, engineers, doctors, teachers, merchants, all coming home. Humanity was pulling in its borders like a wounded animal retreating to its den. But they weren't just retreating. They were preparing. Fleet Admiral Greg Hamilton met them when they arrived at Earth orbit. The old admiral looked like he hadn't slept in days. He probably hadn't. He greeted Paul Grant with a salute that had actual respect in it. I'm sorry it came to this, Paul, Greg said. Paul shook his head. I'm not. I spent 12 years trying to make them listen. 12 years wasted. How many lives could we have saved if we'd learned this lesson earlier? Greg led them to a classified briefing room deep in Fleet Command. What he showed them there made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Ships. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Sleek vessels that looked nothing like the civilian transports and exploratory craft humanity had been building for public view. These were warships. And they looked hungry. We started building these 30 years ago, Greg explained. Right after we joined the galactic community. Some of us thought it was strange that every other species kept military secrets while expecting humans to share everything. So, we kept some secrets of our own. The ships had names like Retribution and Reckoning and No Mercy. Jake saw one called the Vindication, another named Justice Delayed. They were beautiful and terrible, like poems written in metal and fury. We've got weapon systems the Council doesn't know exist, Greg continued. Stealth technology that makes our ships invisible to their sensors. Cyber warfare capabilities that can shut down their computers before they know we're there. And we've got something else. We've got 3 generations of people who tried to play nice and got kicked in the teeth for it. People who are done asking permission. Sophie was staring at the fleet display with something like hunger in her eyes. When do we deploy? Soon, Greg said. But first, we wait. Let them feel what it's like without us. Let their economies start crashing. Let their infrastructure start failing. Let them understand that humanity wasn't weak. We were generous. And they mistook generosity for weakness. Nathan Cross pulled up a star map showing the Vrak's dominion. What about them? The ones who actually pulled the trigger on New Terra? Greg's smile was not pleasant. Oh, they're special. We've got something planned for them. See, the Vraks are moving on another human colony. Place called New Hope. Mining world, about 800,000 people. They think it'll be easy. Just like New Terra was easy. Jake leaned forward. We're evacuating New Hope? Already done, Greg confirmed. Every civilian is gone. But the Vraks don't know that. They're going to show up expecting easy prey. Instead, they're going to find out what happens when you pick a fight with someone who's done being nice. The plan was simple and brutal. Let the Vraks fleet arrive at New Hope. Let them think they've found another helpless target. Then show them the real, human military. The one that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 decades. Jake got command of Battle Group 7. 30 ships, all crewed by people who had lost someone on New Terra. Sophie was his second. Nathan ran tactical. Lisa set up medical, though nobody expected to need it for human casualties. They took their positions in the shadow of New Hope's gas giant. The stealth systems worked perfectly. Even military-grade sensors couldn't find them. They waited in the dark like predators. And Jake thought about Amy teaching her students about ancient Earth poetry. She'd loved the old writers, the ones who wrote about justice and consequence. She would have appreciated what was about to happen. The Vrax fleet arrived right on schedule. 27 warships. Enough to glass a planet or conquer a colony. They moved into orbit around New Hope with the confidence of people who thought they couldn't lose. After all, who would stop them? The Council? The Council didn't care. Jake opened a single channel to the Vrax flagship. He kept his voice calm, just like Paul had during his broadcast. This is Commander Jake Morrison of the human fleet. You came here expecting to kill more innocent people. You came here thinking we'd let it happen again. You were wrong. About both. The Vrax commander started to respond, but Jake cut him off. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to show you something. You wanted to see what humans look like when we stop being patient. Take a good look. It's the last thing you'll see. Battle Group 7 decloaked all at once, 30 ships appearing from nowhere, surrounding the Vrax fleet like a closing fist. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, the Vrax fleet was debris, glowing metal cooling in the void, and humanity had sent its message to the galaxy. The age of tolerance was over. The age of consequences had begun. Lieutenant Chris Bennett had been undercover in the Lumenthy research station for 3 weeks. His synthetic skin mimicked the crystalline structure of Lumenthy workers well enough to pass casual inspection, and his falsified credentials identified him as a low-level technician. Nobody paid much attention to technicians. That's how he got close enough to see what they were really building. The Stellar Convergence Array sat in the center of the research bay like a metal flower, with thorns pointing at the sky. Chris didn't understand all the physics involved, but he understood enough. The weapon would fire a beam that would destabilize a star's fusion process. The star would collapse, then explode, consuming every planet in the system. He sent his report through encrypted channels and waited for orders. They came back within an hour. Observe and report. Do not engage. Fleet Admiral Greg Hamilton wanted complete intelligence before making any moves. Chris spent the next week documenting everything. The weapon's power requirements, which were massive. The charging sequence, which took 48 hours. The targeting system, which required precise calculations about stellar mass and composition. And the list of priority targets. Earth was number 1 on that list. Back on Earth, Greg Hamilton gathered his command staff. Jake Morrison was there, along with Sophie Blake, Nathan Cross, Dr. Lisa Hayes, and Captain Ellen Foster. They looked at Chris Bennett's intelligence reports in grim silence. A direct assault would cost thousands of lives, Nathan said. The station is heavily defended, and the Lumenthy have been reinforcing it daily. They know it's their last chance. Ellen studied the tactical display. We could do it. The cost would be high, but we could take the station. And that's exactly what they expect, Sophie said. They're counting on us to come in guns blazing. They've turned that station into a fortress, specifically to make us pay in blood. Greg looked at Jake. Thoughts? Jake had been quiet, staring at the display of the weapon that could kill billions of people. We spent 73 years being patient. Everyone thought that was weakness. It wasn't. It was strategy. We were learning, watching, understanding how they think, and how their systems work. He looked up at the others. We apply the same principle here. Don't give them the battle they expect. Give them the battle they're not prepared for. Sophie smiled slowly. You want to use patience as a weapon. Exactly. We don't rush in. We systematically dismantle everything that weapon needs to function. Power supplies, data networks, supply lines, personnel. We make it impossible to complete without firing a single shot at the station itself. The campaign began the next day. Human Special Operations Teams, veterans of dozens of actions against Zthrak's installations, deployed across Lumenthy space. They were ghosts, moving through enemy territory without being seen, striking at targets the Lumenthy didn't even know were vulnerable. Sophie's cyber warfare teams hit first. The Stellar Convergence Array required massive amounts of data. Complex calculations performed by some of the most advanced computers in galactic space. Those computers were networked, because the Lumenthy had never considered that someone could infiltrate their systems so completely. The computers started giving wrong answers. Not obviously wrong, which would have been noticed. Just wrong enough. Calculations that would take the weapon's beam a few degrees off target. Timing sequences that would be microseconds too slow. Tiny errors that would compound into catastrophic failures. Ellen Foster's strike groups interdicted supply convoys. The weapon needed exotic materials, rare elements that could only be mined in specific locations. Human ships appeared from nowhere, disabled the transports, allowed the crews to escape in life pods, and either destroyed the cargo or took it back to human space. The Lumenthy tried to compensate. They rerouted convoys, increased security, used military escorts. It didn't matter. The humans had spent decades mapping every supply route in galactic space. They knew where the alternative routes led, what the backup sources were, how to strangle logistics without ever appearing predictable. Dr. Lisa Hayes ran the most unusual operation. She started sending messages directly to the Lumenthy scientists working on the weapon. Personal messages, routed through channels the Lumenthy government couldn't monitor. The messages were simple and devastating. They explained exactly what the weapon would do. Not the technical specifications, but the human cost. How many children would die when Earth's star collapsed? How many families would be erased? How many lives, dreams, hopes, and futures would end in screaming fire? And then Lisa asked a question. Could they live with that? The first defection happened 3 days later. A Lumenthy physicist named Kell simply walked away from the project, leaving behind a resignation note that said he couldn't be part of genocide. Then another scientist left. Then a whole team of engineers. The Lumenthy government threatened them, imprisoned some, made examples of others. It didn't matter. Lisa kept sending messages, and the defections continued. Some scientists couldn't ignore their conscience once someone forced them to look at it. Jake Morrison coordinated the entire operation from a command ship positioned just outside Lumenthy space. He watched the pieces fall into place with the same careful attention he'd once applied to diplomatic negotiations. This was negotiation too, in a way, just with different tools. Power Relay Station 7 is offline, Nathan reported. That's the last of the primary grid. The weapon can't charge without it. How long until they repair it? Jake asked. Our analysis says 6 weeks minimum. They don't have the replacement parts in inventory. The Ressa. In quote. The Ressa Darg. The Ressa Darg. Sophie looked up from her console. 3 more senior researchers just left the project. That's 15 total in the last week. The Lumenthy are running out of people who know how to operate this thing. It was working. Slowly. Methodically. Without the dramatic fleet battle the Lumenthy had prepared for. Humanity was dismantling the threat. The weapon was becoming an expensive monument to desperation, surrounded by defenses that had nothing to defend. While operations continued against the Lumenthy, the broader galactic situation continued to deteriorate. The Council was fragmenting. Species that had maintained unity for centuries were turning on each other, arguing about who was responsible for the current crisis. The Quellan had fully withdrawn from the Council, signing a separate peace treaty with humanity. The Krill followed, though their withdrawal was messier, involving internal political struggles and a near civil war. The remaining species watched their economies collapse and their military power evaporate. Unity Station was practically abandoned now. Without human maintenance, too many systems had failed. The remaining council staff had relocated to a Lumenthy orbital platform, but even that was running on backup power. The galactic community that had seemed so permanent and powerful was revealed to be a fragile thing, dependent on the cooperation of people they'd taken for granted. Ambassador Paul Grant watched the collapse from Sanctuary and felt no triumph, just exhaustion and a deep sadness for what could have been. He spoke with Jake via secure communication one evening, both of them too tired to maintain professional distance. "We're winning," Paul said. "But I keep thinking about what we've lost. Not just New Terra, but the dream. The idea that different species could work together, build something better than any of us could alone." Jake was quiet for a moment. "That dream died when they voted to ignore New Terra. We didn't kill it. They did. I know. But that doesn't make it hurt less." "No," Jake agreed. "It doesn't. But we can't let that stop us. We tried their way for 73 years. Patience, diplomacy, faith in the system. It got 4.2 million people killed. We can't afford to be naive anymore." Paul knew he was right. That was the worst part. Being right, without feeling good about it. The final collapse of the Vrak's dominion came not with a battle but with a whimper. High Commander Zthrak, the reptilian leader who had ordered New Terra's destruction, was captured trying to flee to neutral space. His fleet had disintegrated, his government had fallen, and his people were in chaos. Ellen Foster personally took him into custody. She wanted to kill him, every fiber of her being screamed for his blood. But she didn't. Because humanity wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice meant trials, evidence, testimony from survivors if there had been any survivors. Zthrak would face a human court. He would answer for every life lost on New Terra. The punishment wouldn't bring anyone back, but it would send a message. Actions have consequences. And the bill always comes due. The Lumenthy finally gave up on their superweapon. With half their scientists defected, their power grid in ruins, and their supply lines cut, the Stellar Convergence Array was just an expensive piece of art. They dismantled it voluntarily, hoping it would convince humanity to show mercy. Greg Hamilton received the Lumenthy surrender personally. The crystalline delegates flickered with what his translators said was shame. They offered full access to their military records, reparations, demilitarization, everything humanity had asked for months ago, before it had to be taken by force. "Why now?" Greg asked them. "Why surrender now, when you could have chosen peace before all this death?" The Lumenthy leader, a being named Shard, was quiet for a long time. Then it said something Greg would remember for the rest of his life. "We didn't believe you would really fight. We thought humans were weak because you were patient. We mistook your tolerance for inability. We learned too late that your patience was a choice, not a limitation. And we learned that when that choice was taken away, you were far more dangerous than we ever imagined." Greg accepted their surrender. But he knew this wasn't the end. The war might be over, but the peace would be harder. Building something new from the ashes of the old galactic order. Making sure this never happened again. Remembering the dead while trying to move forward. That night, Greg stood in his quarters looking at a picture of Earth from orbit. Somewhere down there were families who had lost loved ones on New Terra. They would want to know their sacrifice meant something. He hoped he could give them that. Justice, consequences, and a galaxy that would never forget what happened when humanity's tolerance snapped. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to offer. The trial of High Commander Zthrak took place on Sanctuary, broadcast across every communication channel in galactic space. Humanity wanted everyone to see justice being done, not hidden behind closed doors or sanitized for diplomatic convenience. The truth, raw and unfiltered, for the entire galaxy to witness. The courtroom was simple. No grand architecture, no imposing symbols of authority, just a room with seats for witnesses, a stand for the accused, and a panel of judges drawn from human colonies across known space. People who understood what had been lost because they had lost it themselves. Zthrak sat in the accused stand, his reptilian features showing nothing. He refused legal representation, claiming that Vrak's commanders answered to no one but their own. The human judges allowed it. They wanted no one to claim the trial was unfair. The prosecution presented their case over 3 days. Satellite footage of the bombardment played in full. Testimony from the few automated systems that survived, describing the methodical destruction of every settlement. Records from Zthrak's own flagship showing the orders he gave, the targets he selected, the deliberate choice to fire on civilian populations. The defense Zthrak offered for himself was brief. New Terra was a military target harboring insurgents who threatened Vrak's security. We acted within our rights as a sovereign power. The chief judge, a woman named Helen Park who had lost her entire extended family on New Terra, looked at him with an expression of cold clarity. Present evidence of these insurgents. Zthrak said nothing. He had no evidence because there had been no insurgents. New Terra was a farming colony. Teachers and families and people trying to build something peaceful far from old conflicts. Everyone knew it. Zthrak knew it. He just didn't care. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of genocide. Guilty of crimes against sentient life. Guilty of willful destruction of civilian populations. The sentence was life imprisonment, under conditions that would keep him alive for his natural lifespan, but give him nothing else. No comfort, no status, no power, just time to think about what he'd done. As they led him away, Zthrak finally spoke again. You think this changes anything? You think punishing me makes you better than us? You destroyed my entire civilization for one colony. Judge Park's response was quiet, but it carried across the courtroom and through every broadcast receiver in the galaxy. We destroyed your military. Your people still live. New Terra doesn't. That's the difference between justice and murder. You should learn it. The trial ended, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. The Galactic Council was gone, replaced by something new that humanity had a much larger voice in designing. The old structure that had failed so completely was torn down, and the new one was built with hard lessons learned. Captain Ellen Foster stood on the bridge of the Vindication, watching construction crews build what would become Unity Station 2. This time, it wasn't built in the middle of nowhere as a symbol of neutral ground. It was built in human space, orbiting sanctuary, and the message was clear. If you want to be part of this community, you come to us. And you follow rules that actually mean something. Jake Morrison had accepted the position of administrator for the new Interspecies Council. He didn't want it, but Admiral Greg Hamilton convinced him it mattered. Someone who remembered New Terra needed to be in charge, to make sure the new system didn't repeat the old mistakes. Sophie Blake became Chief of Security, which meant she ran intelligence operations across the new Council territories. Her networks watched for threats, but also watched for injustice. Any species trying to marginalize another. Any government moving toward the kind of authoritarianism that enabled atrocities. The humans had learned their lesson. Prevention was better than response. Dr. Lisa Hayes established the Interspecies Medical Exchange, but it operated differently than before. Humanity shared medical knowledge freely with species that had earned trust. With others, the sharing was conditional, dependent on their treatment of their own people and their neighbors. Knowledge was power, and power needed to be given carefully. Nathan Cross led the engineering corps, rebuilding infrastructure across former council space. The Quellan farming worlds that had stood by humanity got the best technology humans could provide. The krill mining operations that had tried to help got human expertise and support. The species that had voted against New Terra got basic assistance and nothing more. It wasn't cruelty. It was consequences. Actions mattered. Choices had weight. The galaxy was learning to live with that reality. Ambassador Paul Grant, technically retired, spent his time working with younger diplomats, teaching them the lessons he'd learned over decades. The importance of backing words with capability. The difference between patience and weakness. The necessity of being willing to walk away from negotiations when the other side negotiates in bad faith. One of his students, a young woman named Katie Lopez, asked him a question that others had been afraid to voice. "Sir, do you regret how things turned out? Do you wish we'd found a peaceful solution?" Paul thought about it for a long time before answering. "I regret that 4.2 million people had to die before the galaxy learned to take us seriously. I regret that the Council's systems failed so completely. I regret that we had to become warriors when we wanted to be explorers. But do I regret how we responded? No. We tried peace. We tried patience. We tried every civilized option they claim to value. When those failed, we did what we had to do. The only real regret I have is that we didn't prepare for this possibility sooner." The Zthrak's territories were redistributed among the species willing to take responsibility for them. The Zthrak's people themselves, now leaderless and scattered, faced a choice: accept rehabilitation under human oversight or remain isolated. Most chose rehabilitation. The alternative was slow extinction. The Lumenthy paid their reparations in technology and knowledge. Their computer systems, their scientific advances, their understanding of physics that had almost been turned into genocide. It wasn't enough to balance the scales, but it was something. And it served as a reminder every time they made a payment. This is what your choices cost. On the first anniversary of New Terra's destruction, every human ship in the galaxy observed 1 hour of silence. No communications, no operations, just stillness and remembrance. And across Council space, other species did the same. The Quellan colonies that humanity had saved. The Krill cooperatives that had worked alongside humans. Even some Lumenthy stations, the ones where scientists who had defected from the weapon project now lived. They remembered because humanity made sure they remembered. Every Council session began with a moment of silence for New Terra. Every treaty included language explicitly protecting civilian populations. Every agreement referenced the consequences of the old Council's failure. Jake Morrison stood in the memorial gardens on Sanctuary, looking at the wall of names. 4.2 million of them, carved in stone, that would last centuries. His sister Amy's name was there, along with every other person who died because the galaxy didn't take human lives seriously enough. Sophie Blake found him there. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, in companionable silence. They'd both lost people. Everyone had lost someone. "Do you think they'll really remember?" Sophie asked eventually. "Or will they forget in a few generations when we're not around to remind them?" Jake pointed to the wall of names. "We built this to last. But more than that, we built a system that can't ignore atrocities the way the old one did. We put humans in positions where we can stop it from happening again. Not just to us, but to anyone. That's the real memorial. Making sure this never happens to anyone else." Captain Ellen Foster retired from active military service and took a position training the next generation of officers. She taught them tactics and strategy, but also taught them judgment: when to fight, when to negotiate, when to walk away. The importance of backing diplomacy with the credible threat of force. One of her students asked her about the Battle of New Hope, the 17-minute engagement that announced humanity's arrival as a military power. "Ma'am, how did you know it would work? How did you know we could win?" Ellen smiled. "I didn't know we could win. I knew we had to try. There's a difference. You don't fight because you're sure of victory. You fight because the alternative is unacceptable. The Zthrak's were going to keep killing our people until someone stopped them. The Council wasn't going to stop them. So we did. Victory was necessary, not guaranteed. We just worked hard enough to make it happen." Years passed. The new Council structure stabilized. Trade routes reopened, but under different terms. Human ships transported cargo again, but humanity charged for the service and reserved the right to refuse clients who didn't meet basic ethical standards. The galactic economy recovered. But it looked different. Less centralized, more accountable, with real consequences for exploitation or aggression. Species that wanted to participate needed to earn their place through good behavior, not just show up expecting privileges. Ambassador Paul Grant died in his sleep at the age of 87. His funeral was attended by representatives from across known space. Even some Lumenthy came, the ones who had defected from the weapon project and spent years trying to atone. Jake Morrison gave the eulogy. Paul Grant spent 12 years trying to make the old council work. He believed in diplomacy, in patience, in the idea that reason could triumph over power. And he was right to believe that. The tragedy is that the system he believed in didn't deserve that belief. But Paul never gave up on the idea that different species could work together. He just recognized that it needed to be built on justice, not just convenience. The new council exists because Paul understood both the dream and its requirements. We miss him. The galaxy is poorer for his loss. They buried Paul in the memorial gardens on Sanctuary, near the wall of names from New Terra. It seemed right somehow. He'd spent his life trying to prevent more names from being added to walls like that. Katie Lopez, now an ambassador in her own right, stood at the wall reading names. A Krill delegate approached her, one of the younger generation that had grown up after the war. "Do humans still hate us?" the Krill asked. "For what our predecessors did." Katie considered the question carefully. "Hate? No. We're not going to punish your generation for the choices of the one before. But we remember. We remember who stood with us and who stood silent. We remember who voted for justice and who voted for committees. That memory shapes how we interact with everyone. Trust is earned, and your species is still in the process of earning it back." The Krill delegate clicked thoughtfully. "That seems fair. Harsh, but fair. Fair is all we ever asked for," Katie said. "Just fair treatment under laws that apply equally to everyone. The old council couldn't give us that. The new one will, or we'll tear it down and build something else. That's the real lesson of New Terra. Systems that don't deliver justice don't deserve to exist." Decades after the war, human children learned about New Terra in school, not as abstract history, but as a living reminder of the cost of being unprepared, of trusting systems that didn't deserve trust, of hoping others would protect you when they had no reason to care. The lessons were hard. The lesson that sometimes patience runs out. The lesson that you need to be able to defend what you love. The lesson that tolerance is a gift to be given carefully, not a weakness to be exploited. But alongside those hard lessons, children learned about the rebuilding. About species working together under a system that actually functioned. About the Quellan farmers and Krill engineers who had been humanity's friends when friendship was dangerous. About the possibility of cooperation based on mutual respect instead of convenient apathy. Jake Morrison, now elderly and retired, visited the memorial gardens every week. He walked past the wall of names, reading them slowly, remembering his sister Amy and the millions of others. Sometimes, young people would find him there and ask questions. "Sir, do you think it was worth it? The war, the deaths, everything we went through?" Jake always gave the same answer. "Worth it? That's the wrong question. It was necessary. The Vraks were going to keep killing us. The council was going to keep enabling them. Someone had to stop it. We did. The cost was high. But the alternative was extinction or slavery. So we paid the cost, and we made sure the galaxy remembered why." On the 50th anniversary of New Terra's destruction, the council held a special session. Every species sent their highest representatives. The session began with the traditional moment of silence. But then, something new happened. The Lumenthy representative, a young crystalline being named Clarity, approached the podium. 50 years ago, my people were part of a system that failed humanity catastrophically. We voted against justice because it was inconvenient. We stood silent while millions died, because speaking up required courage we didn't have. I was not alive during those events, but I carry the shame of my species' failure. Clarity paused, its body flickering with emotion. Today, I speak for the new generation of Lumenthy. We remember New Terra. We remember the lessons our predecessors learned too late. We remember that tolerance is not weakness, and patience is not surrender. We remember that humanity gave the galaxy a chance to do the right thing, and we chose not to take it. That choice has defined the last 50 years. We hope that our actions in the next 50 will begin to earn back what our predecessors threw away. Other species gave similar speeches. The krill, the Quellan, even some Vrax representatives from the rehabilitated territories, all of them acknowledging the failure, accepting the consequences, committing to better. Katie Lopez, now the senior human ambassador, gave the closing remarks. 50 years ago, humanity's tolerance snapped. We became something we never wanted to be. Warriors instead of explorers. Enforcers instead of partners. But we did what was necessary, and we built something better from the ashes of what failed. This council works because everyone here remembers what happens when it doesn't. Everyone here knows that justice delayed is justice denied. Everyone here understands that actions have consequences. She looked around the chamber at representatives from 100 species. New Terra is gone. Those 4.2 million people aren't coming back. But their deaths weren't meaningless. They taught the galaxy a lesson that will never be forgotten. That humanity has limits. That patience, while vast, is not infinite. That tolerance is a gift that must be respected. Every treaty we sign, every law we pass, every decision we make is shaped by those lessons. The dead of New Terra are still teaching us. We honor them by learning. The session ended. Delegates returned to their worlds. The machinery of galactic civilization continued, but it ran on different principles now. Principles written in the aftermath of humanity's tolerance breaking. Principles that valued justice over convenience and action over procedure. Jake Morrison died peacefully at the age of 93, surrounded by family in the same memorial gardens where he'd spent so much time. His last words were simple. We remembered. Make sure they keep remembering. And they did. Generations later, the galaxy still remembered. Every human child learned about New Terra. Every alien diplomat understood the consequences of the old council's failure. Every civilization that joined the interspecies community learned the history of why it was structured the way it was. No species would ever forget the day humanity's tolerance snapped, because humanity had made absolutely certain the lesson was permanent. It was written in treaties and laws. It was taught in schools across 1,000 worlds. It was commemorated in memorials that would stand for millennia. The age of patience had ended in fire. What rose from those ashes was something harder, more realistic, but also more just. A galaxy that finally understood that human tolerance had always been a choice, never a weakness. And when that choice was made impossible, humanity showed the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The memorial wall on Sanctuary still stood, 4.2 million names carved in stone. And every year, on the anniversary, every human ship in the galaxy fell silent for an hour. Other species joined them in that silence, because they understood what it meant. It meant remembering. It meant never again. It meant that the day humanity's tolerance snapped would echo through history forever. A permanent reminder that actions have consequences, and some lessons are written in ways that can never be erased.